I installed cameras after HOA kept entering my land. They sent 6 guys. I sent 1 lawyer. They came on a Tuesday morning, 6 of them, matching navy vests with gold embroidery that read, Oak Ridge Hills Compliance Team. They lined up on my driveway like they were posing for a catalog nobody asked for. Clipboards in hand, walkie-talkies on their belts, sunglasses despite the overcast sky. And in front of them, like a general surveying conquered territory, stood Barbara Lawson, president of the Homeowners Association for 15 years running. "Mr. Chen," she announced, loud enough for neighbors 3 houses down to hear, "your security cameras violate Section 14 of our Community Privacy Ordinance. You have 72 hours to remove them, or we will remove them for you, along with a $25,000 fine." I stood on my porch, coffee still warm in my hand, watching 6 adults who apparently had nothing better to do on a Tuesday morning than intimidate a 49-year-old man and his elderly mother. Behind me, through the screen door, I could hear my mother shuffling nervously, confused, afraid. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. Fear translates in every language. I had spent 20 years in Silicon Valley building systems to protect companies worth billions from hackers and corporate espionage. I had faced down Russian cybercriminals, Chinese state actors, and teenage geniuses who could break encryption that cost millions to develop. 6 people in matching vests didn't scare me. I set my coffee down on the porch railing, took my time. Let the silence stretch. 20 years in cybersecurity taught me that panic is a luxury you can't afford when someone's trying to take something from you. It also taught me that the person who speaks first usually loses. Barbara shifted her weight. Good. She wasn't used to waiting. "Mrs. Lawson," I said calmly, "those cameras are on my property, pointing at my property, recording my property. They don't capture anything beyond my fence line. I checked the regulations before installing them. Twice." She took a step forward, her smile tightening into something uglier. The 6 behind her shifted, sensing tension. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the camera above my door, the one she wanted removed, caught every syllable in crystal-clear audio. "This is a nice neighborhood, Mr. Chen. Quiet, established. Some people fit in here. Some don't. I'm trying to help you understand that before things get complicated." I looked at her for a long moment, at the 6 people behind her, shifting their weight, avoiding my eyes, at the cars parked on my street, neighbors watching from windows, pretending not to watch, at my mother's shadow behind the screen door, small and frightened. "You brought 6 people to intimidate a 72-year-old woman and her son," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have 1 lawyer, and he's been watching this conversation live for the last 4 minutes. Barbara's smile cracked. Just a hair, just enough for me to know I had hit the mark. I pulled out my phone, turned the screen toward her. James Washington's face filled the display. He was in his office, legal pad in front of him, pen moving as he took notes on everything he was witnessing through my doorbell camera. "You sent 6 guys in matching vests," I continued. "I sent 1 civil rights attorney. Guess which one of us is about to have a very bad year?" One of the men behind Barbara, younger, nervous, probably new to the compliance team, actually took a step backward. Barbara noticed and shot him a look that could have frozen water pipes. "This isn't over, Mr. Chen," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "No," I agreed. "It isn't, because now I have everything I need." She turned sharply and walked back to her car. The 6 followed like ducklings, though they didn't look nearly as confident as they had 5 minutes ago. I watched them drive away, dust settling behind their tires, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My mother opened the screen door. "Martin, what happened?" Who were those people? I turned to her, this woman who had survived more than Barbara Lawson could ever imagine, and I smiled. Nobody, Ma. Just some people who made a very big mistake. That was the moment everything changed. But to understand how we got there, I need to take you back 4 months, to the day I finally brought my mother home. My parents came to America from Taiwan in 1979. I've heard the story so many times I can recite it like scripture. They arrived at San Francisco International Airport on a gray February morning with 2 suitcases, $400, and a dream so fragile it could have shattered at any border crossing. My father was 31. My mother was 28. They had been married for 3 years and had spent every day of those 3 years saving for this moment. The flight, the visa fees, the minimum required to show immigration they wouldn't become public charges. My father spoke maybe 30 words of English. My mother spoke less. They had no connections in America, no family waiting, no safety net, no guarantee that any of this would work. They had an address for a cousin's friend's brother who might be able to help them find a room to rent. That was it. That was everything they had. The cousin's friend's brother turned out to be gone. Moved to Portland 6 months earlier, no forwarding address. My parents spent their first night in America sleeping in the airport, surrounded by their 2 suitcases, because they didn't know what else to do. But they figured it out. They always figured it out. My father got a job washing dishes at a Cantonese restaurant in San Jose, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The steam from the industrial sinks warped his glasses so badly he had to tape them together. His hands cracked and bled from the chemicals. He came home smelling like grease and soy sauce and exhaustion, and he never once complained. Not once in 40 years. My mother took in sewing, alterations, repairs, custom work for anyone who would pay. She worked at a machine in our tiny apartment until her back curved and her fingers bled. She developed arthritis in her 30s from the repetitive motion, but she kept going. She made wedding dresses for brides who would never know that the woman stitching their gowns couldn't afford a wedding dress of her own. They did this for 40 years of renting, of saving, of telling themselves that someday they would own a piece of this country. A real house with a yard, a place where no landlord could tell them to leave, a place where they could plant a garden and know they would be there to harvest it. When I was born in 1985, they had been in America for 6 years. They were still renting, they were still saving. My mother used to walk me past houses on our street and say, in Mandarin, someday we'll have one of those. Someday never came for them. My father died in September 2019. Lung cancer, probably from decades of breathing and cleaning chemicals and kitchen fumes, though we'll never know for sure. He was 71 years old. He had worked every single day of his adult life, and in the end, what did he have to show for it? He died in a rented apartment, looking out a window at a parking lot, still dreaming of the house he never got. I held his hand in those final hours. My mother sat on the other side of the bed, crying silently the way she had learned to cry over 40 years of swallowing her pain. And my father looked at me with eyes that were already starting to fade and said, in Mandarin because he never fully mastered English despite 4 decades of trying, "Take care of your mother. Make sure she has a home." I promised him. I would buy her a house. A real house. With a garden. With a yard. With space for grandchildren to run around someday. I promised him that everything they sacrificed, every cracked dish, every pricked finger, every night spent sleeping on a mattress on the floor because the money had to go towards something more important. None of it would be for nothing. It took me 5 more years. I had done well in tech, 20 years of cybersecurity work, building systems that protected companies worth billions from every kind of threat imaginable. I was good at my job. I was paid accordingly. But Silicon Valley is expensive, and I had spent years helping my parents when their income started declining, making sure they had health insurance, making sure the rent got paid when my father got too sick to work. After he died, I saved everything. I lived in a studio apartment. I drove a 12-year-old Honda. I invested carefully, conservatively, building toward the promise I'd made. And finally, in early 2024, I found it. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a quarter acre in a quiet suburb outside Houston. The house had a wraparound porch, a 2-car garage, and a backyard that caught the afternoon sun perfectly. Live oak trees along the fence line, a garden bed that looked like it had been waiting for someone who knew how to use it. Texas was cheaper than California. The cost of living was manageable. The weather was warm. And the neighborhood, Oak Ridge Hills it was called, seemed peaceful, safe. The kind of place where an elderly woman could walk in the mornings without worrying. When I showed my mother the photos on my laptop, she cried. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just tears sliding down her face, quiet and steady as she touched the screen like she could feel the walls. "Your father sees this," she said in Mandarin. "I know he sees." The day we moved in, she walked through every room touching the walls like she couldn't believe they were real. She opened every closet. She stood in front of every window. She turned on every faucet just to watch the water run in her own house. Then she went to the backyard, and she stood there for 20 minutes, just looking at the grass, the fence, the oak tree in the corner, the possibilities. She turned to me with tears streaming down her face and said, in Mandarin so soft I almost didn't hear it, "This is ours. Really ours. No one can take it?" "Yes, Ma. Really ours. No one can take it away." I didn't know, standing there in the Texas sunshine watching my mother cry tears of joy, that someone was already planning to try. The first week in Oak Ridge Hills was quiet. Peaceful even. My mother started a garden in the backyard almost immediately. She couldn't help herself. Within 3 days of moving in, she had sketched out plots for tomatoes, peppers, bok choy, bitter melon, and Chinese broccoli. She planted herbs I couldn't name but recognized from my childhood. She had brought seeds from California, tucked into her luggage like contraband hope. Seeds that had originated in Taiwan generations ago. Every morning, she was out there by 6, watering, weeding, talking to the plants in Mandarin like they were old friends she was catching up with. "You'll like it here," I heard her say once to a row of newly sprouted seedlings. "The sun is very good. You'll grow strong." I set up my home office in the spare bedroom. Consulting work, mostly. Companies still paid well for someone who knew how to protect their systems from the endless parade of new threats. I figured I'd ease into semi-retirement, take care of my mother, maybe finally learn to relax. Maybe take up a hobby that didn't involve firewalls and encryption protocols. The neighbors seemed friendly enough. A few waves from across the street. A woman walking her dog who nodded and said good morning. Nothing remarkable, but nothing concerning either. The second week, the letters started. The first one came on a Monday. Crisp white envelope, embossed return address. Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association. I opened it expecting a welcome packet, maybe some information about trash pickup days or community events. New homeowner orientation materials. Instead, I found a violation notice. RE, property at 4127 Willow Creek Lane. Notice of non-compliance. Your landscaping does not conform to community aesthetic standards as outlined in Section 4.2 of the Oak Ridge Hills Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Specifically, grass height exceeds 3.5 inches in multiple areas of front lawn. Fine, $200. Please remit payment within 30 days to avoid additional penalties and interest charges. I walked outside and looked at my lawn. I'd hired a landscaping company specifically to meet whatever standards existed in the community. I had asked them to research the HOA requirements and make sure everything was compliant before we moved in. The grass was maybe 2 inches tall, if that. I got down on my knees and actually measured it with a ruler. 2¼ inches. Maximum. I called the number on the letter. Got a voicemail. You have reached the Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association. Our office hours are Tuesday and Thursday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please leave a message, and someone will return your call within 5 to 7 business days. I left a message explaining the situation. I left my phone number. I asked for a call back. No one called back. 3 days later, another letter. Same embossed envelope. Same formal tone. Re-property at 4127 Willow Creek Lane. Notice of non-compliance. Unapproved modification to exterior. Decorative items on front porch do not conform to Section 7.3 of Community Guidelines regarding visual harmony and aesthetic standards. Specifically, ceramic containers of non-approved color scheme visible from street. Fine, $350. Please remit payment within 30 days. The decorative items were my mother's flower pots, clay pots, glazed blue, holding orchids she had tended for years. They had survived the move from California, wrapped carefully in newspaper and blankets. They were the only things from our old apartment that my mother insisted on bringing herself in the car with us, because she didn't trust the movers not to break them. Now they sat on our porch, catching the morning light, and apparently that was a violation of visual harmony. I called again. Voicemail again, left another message. No response. By the end of the second week, I had received 4 violation notices totaling $1,100 in fines, each one more absurd than the last. The wrong shade of mulch in the garden beds. I had used cedar mulch, reddish-brown, because the landscaper recommended it for the Texas climate. Apparently only dark espresso brown was permitted. A garden hose left visible on the side of the house. It was coiled on a hose reel, mounted to the wall, in a location that could only be seen if you stood in a very specific spot at the edge of my property and craned your neck. But visible was visible. A recycling bin placed at the curb, outside approved hours. I had put it out at 7 p.m. the night before pickup, which was apparently forbidden. Bins could only be placed after 6 a.m. on the day of collection, and had to be retrieved by 8 p.m. the same day. This rule was not mentioned anywhere in the documents I received at closing. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that looked like it had been designed by someone who really loved beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a long table at the front. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pale glow. 5 board members sat at the front table, nameplates in front of them, and in the center seat, presiding like a queen on a municipal throne, sat Barbara Lawson. I had looked her up before the meeting. 63 years old, retired real estate agent. President of the Oak Ridge Hills, HOA, for 15 consecutive years, re-elected each time by margins that seemed suspiciously large for a community with only 400 homes. Her picture on the HOA website showed a woman with carefully styled blonde hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. In person, she was smaller than I expected. Maybe 5'2", thin, with that same too bright smile fixed on her face like it had been installed rather than grown. Her eyes were pale blue, and they swept the room with the constant, calculating attention of someone who was always watching, always keeping score. The room was full. Maybe 40 residents, mostly older, mostly white, all arranged in those beige folding chairs, watching as Barbara called the meeting to order with a small gavel that seemed far too theatrical for discussing pool hours and parking regulations. I sat in the back and listened. Most of the agenda was mundane. Adjustments to the pool schedule, a discussion about speed bumps on Maple Drive, something about geese congregating near the pond and leaving droppings on the walking paths. Barbara handled each item briskly, efficiently, with the air of someone who had done this hundreds of times and found it simultaneously beneath her and essential to her identity. Then they opened the floor for resident concerns. I raised my hand. Barbara looked directly at me. Her eyes swept over me once, twice, taking in everything. My face, my clothes, my posture. Then she looked away and called on a white-haired man in the second row who wanted to discuss fallen leaves. Okay. Maybe she hadn't seen me. I kept my hand raised. She called on a woman concerned about delivery trucks parking too long. My hand stayed up. She called on a man complaining about a neighbor's wind chimes. 20 minutes passed. My arm ached, but I did not lower it. Finally, after exhausting every other possible concern, Barbara pointed in my direction with the resigned air of someone picking up litter. Yes, the gentleman in the back. I stood. The room's attention shifted to me, and I felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes. My name is Martin Chen. I moved into the community last month, 4127 Willow Creek Lane. I've received several violation notices that I believe are in error, and I haven't been able to reach anyone at the HOA office to discuss them. Barbara's smile didn't waver. Violation notices are issued based on routine compliance inspections conducted by our trained volunteers. Mr. Chen, if you'd like to file a formal appeal, the process is outlined in your welcome packet. I didn't receive a welcome packet. That's unfortunate. She managed to make the word sound like my personal failing. Perhaps it was lost in the mail. You can download the relevant documents from our website. I tried. The website says member access is restricted, and the login credentials I was given at closing don't work. A murmur rippled through the room. A few people shifted in their seats. Barbara's smile tightened, just slightly. I'm sure our webmaster can assist you with technical issues. Was there anything else? I looked around the room. 40 faces, all carefully neutral. Not hostile exactly, but not friendly either. No one making eye contact with me, no one nodding in sympathy or recognition. I was a stranger here, and I was making waves, and in communities like this, making waves was the cardinal sin. Just one thing, I said. I'd like to understand specifically why my mother's flower pots violate community standards. They're on my porch. Behind a railing, you can barely see them from the street. Section 7.3 clearly states that exterior decorative items must be approved by the Architectural Committee prior to installation. All exterior modifications and additions require pre-approval, no exceptions. They're flower pots. They're not modifications. They're not permanent. They're just pots with flowers. Rules are rules, Mr. Chen. They apply equally to everyone. She said equally the way some people say, obviously, with a little twist that suggested the opposite was true, with a little emphasis that felt like a weapon. I sat down. The meeting continued. I didn't raise my hand again. When it was over, people filed out quickly, chatting with each other, not looking at me. I stayed in my seat, watching, waiting. I wanted to talk to Barbara directly, without an audience. I wanted to understand what was really happening here. She found me first. Barbara Lawson approached as the room emptied, heels clicking on the tile floor. She moved like someone who expected the world to get out of her way. Up close, her smile looked even more artificial, like a mask that didn't quite fit right. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice low enough that nearby conversations would mask it. "I hope you understand. We have standards here. This community has a certain character. We've worked very hard over many years to maintain it. What character would that be exactly?" She tilted her head, studying me like I was a problem to be solved. a puzzle she found distasteful, but necessary. "You know exactly what I mean." Then she walked away, heels clicking, back straight, not once looking back. I stood alone in the emptying room, folding chairs being stacked around me, and I understood something that I had probably known since the first letter arrived, but hadn't wanted to admit. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. I grew up Asian in America. I know what "you know what I mean" means. I know the code, the implications, the careful phrases that allow people to discriminate while maintaining plausible deniability. It means you don't belong here. It means go back where you came from. It means this was never about landscaping or flower pots or the height of my grass. This was about the color of my skin and the shape of my eyes, and the accent my mother carries when she thanks the mail carrier in broken English. And I was not going to let them win. Over the next 2 months, the pressure escalated in ways that were as predictable as they were infuriating. A slow-motion campaign of harassment designed to make my life so unbearable that I would choose to leave. Week 3. A formal complaint was filed about the odor emanating from my property. Specifically, and I quote from the letter, "Ethnic cooking smells disturbing the peace and comfort of the neighborhood." My mother had made congee and steamed fish that week, the same food she had made for 50 years, the same food that reminded her of home and family and everything she had sacrificed. Apparently, the smell of ginger and soy sauce warranted an official complaint. Week 4. A notice that my front door was the wrong shade of approved earth tones and would need to be repainted at my expense within 60 days. The door was the same color it had been when I bought the house, the same color it had been for the previous owner. No violation had ever been issued to them. I checked. Week 5. A letter arrived claiming my mother had been observed engaging in suspicious activity during her morning walks. She walked around the block at 6 a.m., slowly, doing the exercises her doctor recommended for her arthritis. Apparently, an elderly Asian woman in comfortable shoes moving through the neighborhood before dawn constituted suspicious behavior worth documenting. Week 6. Garbage bin inspectors, I didn't know that was a thing that existed, but apparently it did, found improper sorting violations in my recycling. A glass jar with a paper label still attached, a plastic container that hadn't been rinsed thoroughly enough. Another fine, another letter, another notch on their campaign. Week 7. I came home to find my mailbox knocked off its post. It lay in the grass, dented like someone had hit it with a baseball bat. No witnesses, of course. No camera footage from any neighbors willing to share. The HOA sent me a violation notice the next day for damaged mailbox creating visual blight. They gave me 72 hours to replace it. And then came the note. I found it on a Tuesday morning, folded and stuffed into my new mailbox without an envelope, without a stamp. Just a piece of paper with 5 words written in thick black marker. Go back to China. I stood at the curb holding that note, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not fear. I was too angry for fear. Something harder. Something that had been building for weeks, compressed into a diamond of pure determination. My mother wasn't even from China. She was from Taiwan. But people who write notes like this don't care about geography. They only care about faces that don't look like theirs. That afternoon, I ordered security cameras. Good ones. The kind I used to recommend to tech executives worried about corporate espionage and personal security. 6 cameras to start. 1 over the front door with a wide-angle lens, 1 over the garage covering the driveway, 2 on poles covering the side yards. 2 in the backyard covering the garden and fence line. Night vision capable of reading license plates at 50 feet. Motion detection with instant phone alerts. Cloud storage with automatic backup to multiple servers so footage couldn't be lost, even if someone stole the cameras themselves. I installed them myself, running cables through the attic, drilling holes, mounting brackets into studs. It took me a full weekend. My mother brought me tea and watched nervously. "Is this necessary?" she asked in Mandarin. "Maybe we should just try to get along, not make trouble." "Ma," I said, climbing down from the ladder. "We're not the ones making trouble, and these cameras are going to prove it." I put up signs at the property line as required by Texas law. Property under 24/7 surveillance, audio and video recorded. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I tested every camera, checked every angle, made sure there were no blind spots. Then I waited. 2 days later, at 2:47 a.m., the first motion alert buzzed on my phone. I was asleep when the notification came. The phone vibrated on my nightstand, insistent, pulling me out of a dream about my father. I grabbed it, squinted at the screen. Motion alert. Front driveway. Camera 2. I opened the app and watched in real-time night vision as 2 figures in reflective vests approached my house. They moved carefully, staying in shadows, checking windows. One of them had a flashlight. The other carried something in his hand I couldn't quite identify from the camera angle. They walked across my lawn, my supposedly non-compliant lawn, and stopped at my garbage bins. One of them opened the recycling container, pulled out a bag, and dumped the contents onto my driveway. They picked through my garbage with gloved hands, photographing certain items with their phones, creating evidence. Manufacturing violations. Then they walked to the bushes by my front porch, and I watched as one of them reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object, and tossed it into the greenery near my mother's flower pots. I couldn't see exactly what it was. The angle was wrong, the infrared not quite clear enough. But I saw the motion, saw the deliberate placement, saw the way he stepped back to check that it was hidden. Then they left. Walked back down the driveway, got into a white sedan parked on the street, no plates visible from my camera angle, and drove away into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At 7 a.m., as soon as the sun was fully up, I went outside and searched the bushes. I found it almost immediately, tucked between 2 azalea branches, an empty spray paint can, bright orange, the kind used for marking construction sites. Brand new, not weathered, clearly planted. 8 hours later, a violation notice arrived in my mailbox. Property at 4127 Willow Creek Lane. Notice of non-compliance. Prohibited construction materials found on property during routine compliance inspection. Hazardous materials, spray paint containers, discovered in landscaping. This represents a serious violation of Section 12.4. Fine, $1,200. Please remit payment within 30 days. I held the notice in one hand and the spray paint can, now in a plastic evidence bag, in the other. And I understood, finally, completely, what I was dealing with. They weren't just harassing me. They were manufacturing evidence, planting violations, creating a paper trail designed to crush me under the weight of fines and bureaucratic warfare until I gave up and sold the house. My father died dreaming about. This wasn't random. It was a system, and I had it on camera. I spent the next week doing what I do best, digging. 20 years in cybersecurity teaches you how to find information people don't want you to find. It teaches you patience and pattern recognition and the understanding that everyone, no matter how careful, leaves a trail. I started with public records. HOA financial statements are technically available to members. That's a legal requirement in Texas, but Oak Ridge Hills made accessing them nearly impossible. The website required a login that didn't work. The office phone went to voicemail. I filed 3 formal written requests, sent by certified mail with return receipt, before they finally provided documents. And those documents were so heavily redacted They looked like classified government files. But even redacted documents tell a story if you know how to read them. I could see line items for compliance enforcement that had tripled over the past 5 years. I could see payments to something called Lawson Property Management that appeared every month, regular as rent. I could see legal fees that spiked dramatically every time the dates coincided with property sales in the neighborhood. I pulled property records from the county assessor's office, cross-referenced sales in Oak Ridge Hills over the past decade, looked for patterns, and that's when the picture emerged. In 10 years, 5 families had moved out of Oak Ridge Hills after receiving waves of HOA violations. One family named Nguyen, Vietnamese immigrants who had bought in 2015 and sold in 2017 at a $40,000 loss. One family named Washington, Black, 3 kids, 2 working parents, bought in 2016 and gone by 2018, selling to escape what the wife described in a Yelp review as constant harassment. One family named Gutierrez. One family named Park. One family named Ali. All minorities, all targeted with violations starting within months of moving in, all eventually selling their homes at below market prices, desperate to escape. All selling to the same buyer, Lawson Realty, LLC. I pulled the corporate registration for Lawson Realty from the Texas Secretary of State's website. The registered agent was Thomas Lawson, Barbara's husband. Every family that had been pushed out of Oak Ridge Hills had sold their home to Barbara Lawson's husband's company. That company then resold the properties, usually within 6 months, to new buyers, always white, for 15 to 20% more than they had paid. It wasn't just racism. It was a business model. Identify undesirable. Families through whatever criteria Barbara used. Skin color, country of origin, accent, food smells, whatever triggered her particular brand of hatred. Weaponize the HOA to make their lives unbearable. Bury them in violations and fines. Drive down their property values through manufactured complaints, isolate them socially until they felt like prisoners in their own homes. Then, when they finally broke, when they couldn't take it anymore, Thomas Lawson would appear with a lowball offer. Sympathetic, understanding, positioned as a savior. I know what you've been through. Let me take this off your hands. You can get out, start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere you'll be more comfortable. The families, exhausted and beaten down, would accept, would sell their homes for tens of thousands less than they were worth, would walk away thinking they were lucky to escape, and the Lawsons would pocket the difference when they resold to acceptable buyers. I was target number 6, and unlike the 5 families before me, I was not going to run. The knock came on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that my mother loved. She was in the backyard, watering her garden, talking to her tomato plants about how proud she was of their growth. I was in my office, reviewing camera footage from the past week, documenting every instance of HOA personnel on my property. The knock was hesitant. 3 quick raps. Then silence, then 2 more, like the person wasn't sure they wanted to be there. I checked the camera feed on my phone first, a habit now, ingrained after months of siege. A man stood on my porch, maybe mid-50s, wearing a golf shirt and khakis. He was shifting his weight nervously, glancing around like he expected someone to see him. I recognized him from the HOA meeting. Derek Mills. He had sat on the board, 3 seats down from Barbara, nodding along to everything she said like a bobblehead. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Chen." His voice was hushed. "I'm Derek Mills. I'm on the HOA board. I need to talk to you, but not here. Not where anyone can see. You're standing on my porch. Pretty sure people can see you." He winced. I know, but I couldn't just call. I needed to do this in person. It's about Barbara." about what she's doing to you, about what she's been doing for years. I studied him for a long moment. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight he couldn't bear anymore, and it was crushing him from the inside out. "Come inside," I said. My mother brought tea. She always brought tea for guests. It was automatic, reflexive, part of her DNA. Derek held the cup without drinking, staring at the steam like it might provide answers. "I've been on the board for 7 years," he said quietly. "I knew things weren't right. The way Barbara targeted certain families, the way violations appeared out of nowhere, the way people would move in excited and happy, and within a year they'd be broken, desperate to leave. I watched it happen over and over. And you did nothing." He flinched. "I voted with her." "I always voted with her. Everyone does. Going against Barbara." He shook his head. "You don't go against Barbara. She has connections everywhere. The police chief's wife is on her social committee. The county assessor plays golf with Thomas. She knows people on the zoning board, the water district, everywhere. If you cross her, she can make your life hell in ways you wouldn't even think possible. So what changed? Why are you here now?" He looked up at me, and I saw something like shame in his eyes. Raw, unvarnished shame. "Your mother. I watched her walking the other morning, early, before sunrise. She was just walking, doing her exercises, slow, careful, hurting a little, but still moving. And Barbara was already making calls. Already filing complaints about suspicious activity. Already planning how to use that against you." He set down the teacup. His hands were shaking. I thought about my grandmother. She came here from Poland in 1952, barely spoke English, spent her whole life working, saving, trying to build something for her children. The same dream your parents had, the same dream everyone who comes here has. And I thought, what would I do if someone tried to push her out of her home? What kind of man would I be if I just stood there and watched? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive. Small, black, nondescript. He set it on the table between us. "This is everything. Emails, meeting minutes, financial records, internal memos. Stuff Barbara never let the general membership see. It's all there. The coordination with her husband's company, the targeting of specific families, the manufactured violations. Everything." I picked up the drive. It was lighter than I expected for something that could change everything. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because someone has to stop her, and because—" He hesitated, swallowed hard. "There's something else you need to know. She's planning a final push against you, a mass inspection next week. She wants to find enough violations to file for forced compliance. Basically, legal action to make you sell. She's done it before. It works. How does that help her if I don't want to sell? She files enough violations. She puts liens on your property. You can't sell, can't refinance, can't do anything until you pay off fines that just keep multiplying. Eventually, people break. They sell for whatever they can get, just to make it stop. And Thomas is always there with his company, ready to help." I turned the USB drive over in my hand. Such a small thing. Such enormous consequences. "She really put all of this in writing?" Derek laughed bitterly. "Barbara's been running this community for 15 years. She thinks she's untouchable. She puts everything in writing because she can't imagine anyone would ever dare to challenge her. She brags about it in emails, celebrates when families leave, calls it maintaining community standards. She's about to learn she's not as untouchable as she thinks." Derek stood up, looking suddenly exhausted, like confessing had drained something vital from him. "I should go. If anyone sees my car here too long." I walked him to the door. "Derek, thank you. This took courage." He paused on the porch. "I should have done it years ago. Maybe the Nunguyans would still be here. Maybe the Washingtons. Maybe all of them." He looked out at the street, at the quiet, respectable neighborhood built on quietly respectable racism. Some things you can't take back, but maybe you can make sure they don't happen again. He walked to his car. I watched him drive away. Then I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and started reading. It was worse than I imagined. The files on Derek's drive painted a picture so clear, so damning, that I almost couldn't believe Barbara had been stupid enough to create it. Years of emails, carefully organized by date. Barbara coordinating with Thomas on which properties to target, which families to pressure, which violations to manufacture. The Nguyens are weakening. 2 more months of pressure should do it. Thomas should be ready with an offer around $380,000. They paid $420,000, so that's good margin for us. The Washington family is proving stubborn. The father actually showed up at a meeting and demanded to see documentation. Can you believe it? I've asked the compliance team to increase inspection frequency. Also reaching out to neighbors to file noise complaints. 3 kids. There has to be something. Good news on the park situation. They've accepted Thomas's offer. Closing next month. Make sure the new owners are properly vetted this time. No more surprises. Properly vetted. That's what she called it, making sure the new owners were white. There were internal memos too, policies that never appeared in the official HOA documents. Guidelines for enhanced scrutiny of high-risk properties. Checklists for compliance officers on how to identify violations that could be manufactured with minimal risk of discovery. And then I found the email that made my blood run cold. Sent just 2 weeks ago to her inner circle on the board. The Chens are not leaving quietly like the others. We need to increase pressure. The mother is the weak point. Make her uncomfortable. Old people break faster. If we can't get them out by summer, we'll have to escalate to legal action. Make the mother uncomfortable. Old people break faster. My 72-year-old mother, who had worked her whole life for this home, who had cried tears of joy when she saw the garden she could finally plant, who was out there right now talking to tomatoes in Mandarin because she had finally found a place that was hers. They wanted to break her. I sat at my desk for a long time looking at that email, feeling something cold and certain crystallize inside me. Then I picked up my phone and made a call. James Washington's office. How may I help you? My name is Martin Chen. I need to speak with James about a civil rights matter. Tell him it involves systematic housing discrimination, and I have complete documentation. There was a pause. Please hold. I'm transferring you now. James Washington was everything I needed. A civil rights attorney with 25 years of experience fighting battles that most lawyers considered unwinnable. He had salt and pepper hair, a voice like warm gravel, and a reputation that made powerful people very, very nervous. He came to my house the next afternoon, a Saturday, and I spent 3 hours showing him everything. The violation notices, every single one arranged chronologically. The camera footage edited into a highlight reel of late-night trespassing and evidence planting. Derek's USB drive, contents organized by category and date. He reviewed everything methodically, taking notes, asking occasional questions. When I finished, he sat back and let out a long, slow breath. "Mr. Chen," he said, "this is one of the most well-documented cases of housing discrimination I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. Is it enough?" "Enough?" "Martin, they didn't just violate the Fair Housing Act. They created a paper trail proving they violated it repeatedly, systematically, and with clear financial motivation." Barbara Lawson essentially wrote her own confession and saved it to a shared drive. He picked up one of the printouts, the email about making my mother uncomfortable. This alone is damning. Combined with the pattern evidence from previous families, the financial connection to her husband's company, and the video footage of manufactured violations. This isn't a case. This is a gift. So what do we do? First, I'm filing a formal complaint with HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They have a civil rights division that investigates exactly this kind of systematic discrimination. They take it very seriously, especially when there's documented harm to multiple families. He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Second, I'm preparing a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Barbara Lawson personally, her husband, and Lawson Realty LLC. We're going after them for discriminatory harassment, conspiracy to deprive housing rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. How long will all this take? Federal investigations can take months. The civil lawsuit will be faster, probably 8 to 10 months to trial unless they settle, which they will once they see what we have. And in the meantime, they're planning some kind of mass inspection next week. James smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed his work. Let them do it. In fact, I want them to do it. I want Barbara Lawson to come to your property personally, with her clipboard and her enforcement team, and I want your cameras to record everything she says and does. You want her to incriminate herself further. I want her to feel confident, overconfident, untouchable, the way she always has been. Because overconfident people make mistakes. They say the quiet part out loud. They give us exactly what we need. And my mother? She's scared. She barely leaves the house anymore. She's stopped working in the garden because she feels like she's being watched. James leaned forward and his voice softened. I understand. And I want you to know, the best way to protect your mother is to end this. Permanently. Not by running. Not by settling quietly. By making an example of Barbara Lawson so public, so devastating, that no HOA president in this state ever tries something like this again. We're not just fighting for your house, Martin. We're fighting to make sure this never happens to another family. I thought about the Nguyens, the Washingtons, the Gutierrezes, the Parks, the Alis. 5 families who had been pushed out of their homes, who had given up and walked away, who didn't know that their suffering could have been prevented if someone had fought back sooner. Okay, I said. How do we do this? James pulled out a folder. First, we need to talk about cameras. You have 6 now. You're going to need more. In the week that followed, I turned my home into a fortress of documentation. 12 cameras now, covering every angle of the property. Hidden cameras to supplement the visible ones. Small, discreet, positioned in places Barbara's team wouldn't think to look. Microphones at property line, legal under Texas law, as long as signs were posted. A dedicated server in my office, recording everything in real time, with automatic backup to 3 different cloud services in 3 different states. My mother watched me work, her fear slowly transforming into something else. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness. The same stubbornness that had brought her across an ocean with nothing and built a life from scratch. They think they can scare us, she said one evening, bringing me tea while I configured the new cameras. They don't know who they're dealing with. Ma, you don't have to be brave for me. I know this is hard. She set down the tea and looked at me with eyes that had seen more hardship than Barbara Lawson could ever imagine. Your father and I came here with nothing. Nothing. We slept on the floor. We worked until our hands bled. We didn't do all of that so some woman with a clipboard could take it away. This is my house. My house. And I'm not leaving. She went back to the kitchen, and a few minutes later, I heard her starting dinner. The smell of garlic and ginger and 5 spice filled the air, the smell of home, the smell of defiance. If Barbara Lawson wanted to complain about ethnic cooking odors, she was going to have to smell victory first. The inspection came on Tuesday. 2:47 p.m. I was ready. They arrived in force. 6 compliance officers in matching vests, clipboards in hand. Barbara Lawson in front, wearing a white blazer that probably cost more than my first car. Behind them, a photographer with a camera, already snapping pictures before they even reached my property line. I watched them approach on my phone, the camera feed crisp and clear. James Washington watched too from his office in Houston, connected to the live stream I'd set up that morning. "Perfect," he murmured through my earpiece. "Let them come. Let them do their thing. Don't engage unless you have to." I stepped out onto my porch. My mother stood behind me, visible through the screen door. I wanted them to see her. "Mr. Chen," Barbara announced, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she always affected. "We're here for a scheduled compliance inspection." I didn't receive any notice of a scheduled inspection. She smiled. Too many teeth. HOA Section 3.4 allows for unannounced inspections when there's reasonable suspicion of ongoing violations. Given your history of non-compliance, the board felt it was warranted. "I see. And you need 6 people for that?" "Thoroughness is important, Mr. Chen. Standards must be maintained." They spread out across my property, photographing everything. The grass, the flower pots, the garden hose neatly coiled on its reel, the paint on my mailbox, which I had replaced exactly to HOA specifications. One officer actually got on his hands and knees to measure the height of my lawn with a ruler. I stood on my porch and watched, every camera recording, every word captured. Barbara approached after about 20 minutes, clipboard in hand. "I'm afraid we've found several violations, Mr. Chen. Your grass is at 2.6 inches in several areas, above the 2.5-inch maximum for the summer months. Your previous notice said 3.5 inches was the maximum. Summer regulations are different. It's in the handbook." "The handbook I never received." She ignored that. "Additionally, your exterior cameras are in violation of our privacy ordinance. They'll need to be removed." "Those cameras are pointed at my property. They don't capture anything beyond my fence line. That's not what our visual assessment indicates. We believe the field of view encompasses public spaces and neighboring properties. That's a privacy violation." "You're wrong. The board will be the judge of that." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "Total fines for today's inspection come to $3,400. You'll receive the formal notice by mail." "And Mr. Chen." She stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that the camera above my door would capture every nuance of her expression. "I've tried to be patient with you. I've tried to help you understand how things work here, but you don't seem to want to listen. You don't seem to want to fit in." "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Lawson?" Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. But my cameras were good. My microphones were better. "I'm suggesting that some neighborhoods have a certain character, a certain harmony. And when someone disrupts that harmony, it creates problems for everyone. Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere more suited to your situation." "My situation? You know what I mean, Mr. Chen." There it was again. That phrase. That careful, deniable phrase that meant everything she couldn't say out loud. "I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Lawson. This is my home." Her eyes hardened. The mask slipped just for a moment, and I saw the real Barbara Lawson underneath. The hatred, the entitlement, the absolute conviction that she had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. "We'll see about that," she said. Then she turned and walked away, her compliance team following like obedient dogs. In my earpiece, James Washington was laughing. "Martin, she just handed us the case on a silver platter. Did you hear that? Somewhere more suited to your situation. That's textbook discrimination. I'm filing tomorrow." I watched Barbara's car pull away, watched her compliance team load into their van, and I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. I knew about Derek's files. I knew about the pattern of targeted families. I knew about Lawson Realty and the profit scheme. And I knew that the next time Barbara Lawson came to my door, it wouldn't be for an inspection. It would be for something much, much worse. For her. The breaking point came at 2:14 a.m. on a Friday night. I was asleep, dreaming about my father again. He visited me often in dreams now, standing in the house he never got to see, smiling at my mother's garden. When my phone erupted with motion alerts. Multiple cameras, multiple zones, all at once. I grabbed the phone, heart pounding, and opened the app. 6 figures. Dark clothing. Moving fast across my property. One was heading for the camera above the garage with what looked like a ladder. Another was at the fence line, cutting wires, and in the middle of my driveway, directing operations like a general commanding troops, stood Barbara Lawson. She wasn't even trying to hide. She was wearing dark clothes, yes, but her face was clearly visible in the infrared. She was pointing, gesturing, giving orders to her team as they systematically attempted to destroy every camera I had installed. I watched as one of them climbed the ladder and yanked the garage camera off its mount. Watched as another tore wires out of the exterior wall. Watched as Barbara herself walked to my front porch and ripped down the camera above my door, throwing it onto the lawn like garbage. They didn't know about the hidden cameras. They didn't know about the backup systems. They didn't know that everything they were doing was being recorded and uploaded in real time to servers they could never touch. Through the audio feed, I heard Barbara's voice, clear as a bell. Get all of them, all of them. These people need to learn their place. This is our neighborhood, and I will not have some immigrant family with their cameras and their lawyers ruining what we've built. 15 years I've worked to keep this community what it's supposed to be, and I'm not stopping now. There it was. Everything James needed. Everything a jury would need. These people need to learn their place. Some immigrant family. Keep this community what it's supposed to be. I let them finish. Let them tear down every visible camera. Let them think they had won. When they finally left, at 3:47 a.m., I sat in the dark with my phone and watched the full recording from start to finish. Then I called James. "Did you get all that?" I asked. "Every word, every face, every crime." He paused. "Martin, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never seen anyone hand me a case this completely. She's done. What now? Now we let her think she won. For exactly 3 days. Let her file her violations. Let her strut around her little kingdom feeling invincible. And then, on Tuesday morning, we bring everything crashing down." The Tuesday morning confrontation, the one I started this story with, happened exactly as Barbara expected. She showed up with her 6 enforcers, her clipboard, her prepared ultimatum. She demanded I remove my cameras within 72 hours or face a $25,000 fine. She had no idea that I had already installed new cameras to replace the ones she destroyed. Hidden ones. Better ones. She had no idea that James Washington was watching the whole thing live from his office. She had no idea that Derek had spent the weekend helping a local journalist compile a complete dossier on 15 years of HOA harassment. She stood on my driveway that Tuesday morning, absolutely certain she was delivering the final blow to another problem family. Absolutely certain that I would crumble like the Nguyens, the Washingtons, the Gutierrezes, all the others who came before. And then the cars arrived. 3 of them pulling into my driveway one after another, a sheriff's cruiser, a dark sedan with James Washington emerging from the back seat, leather briefcase in hand, and a news van, Channel 8 Action News, cameras already rolling. Barbara's face went from confident to confused to terrified in the span of about 5 seconds. James stepped forward, immaculate in his gray suit, and presented her with a thick envelope. "Mrs. Lawson, you are hereby served with notice of a federal civil rights lawsuit filed in the United States District Court. The complaint alleges systematic housing discrimination in violation of the Fair Housing Act, conspiracy to deprive housing rights, fraud, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Barbara's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. We also have documented evidence, James continued, of criminal trespassing and vandalism committed by you personally on this property on the night of April 12th. Sheriff, if you would. The deputy stepped forward. Barbara actually took a step backward, nearly bumping into one of her compliance officers. Barbara Lawson, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and vandalism. You have the right to remain silent. This is absurd, she finally managed to say. This is harassment. You have no evidence. James pulled a tablet from his briefcase and pressed play. The video was crystal clear. Barbara's face in night vision. Barbara's voice, loud and angry. These people need to learn their place. This is our neighborhood. One of her compliance officers, the young one, the nervous one, immediately started talking. She made us do it. She said it was just intimidation, nothing serious. Kevin, shut up, Barbara screamed. Too late. The cameras were rolling. The news crew caught everything. My mother stepped out onto the porch. She was shaking, but not with fear, with something else. Something I had never seen in her before. She walked down the steps, slowly, carefully, and stopped in front of Barbara Lawson, who was now being handcuffed by the deputy. My mother was barely 5 feet tall. Barbara towered over her. But somehow, in that moment, my mother seemed like the larger presence. I waited 40 years for this house, my mother said, her English careful but clear. My husband died dreaming about it. You think 6 people with clipboards can scare me? I came across the ocean with nothing. I built a life from nothing. You are nothing. Barbara stared at her, speechless. The news camera captured every second. My mother survived things you can't imagine, I said, stepping down to stand beside her. She survived poverty and prejudice and 40 years of back-breaking work. She survived losing the love of her life. You really thought you could break her with fake violations and threatening letters? Barbara was led to the sheriff's car. She kept trying to talk, to explain, to justify, but no one was listening anymore. James turned to me as the cars began to pull away. That video is going to be on every station in Texas by tonight, he said. Probably national by tomorrow. These people need to learn their place. That's the kind of quote that ends careers, ends companies, ends everything. Good, I said. My mother took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Your father is proud, she said in Mandarin. I know he is. The fallout exceeded even James's expectations. The video went viral within hours. HOA president's racist tirade caught on camera. That was the headline that stuck. The footage of Barbara screaming that these people need to learn their place played on local news, then regional, then national. Major networks picked it up. It trended on Twitter for 3 days. Someone created a hashtag Oak Ridge Racist, that accumulated over 2 million uses. Lawson Realty, Thomas's company, was identified in the coverage. The connection to the HOA harassment was laid bare for everyone to see. Clients canceled contracts, partners dissolved relationships, real estate agents who had worked with Thomas for years issued public statements distancing themselves from him. Within a week, Lawson Realty closed its doors permanently, unable to survive the tsunami of boycotts and bad press. The HOA board held an emergency meeting without Barbara, who was busy posting bail and meeting with lawyers. Derek Mills, armed with every document Barbara had ever written, led the charge for her removal and the dissolution of the compliance committee. The vote was unanimous, and then the civil case went to court. I sat in that federal courtroom next to James Washington, watching as attorney laid out 15 years of discrimination in devastating detail. The emails, the pattern of targeting, the connection between HOA harassment and Lawson Realty purchases, the testimony from former residents. The Nguyens flew in from Seattle, where they had moved after leaving Oak Ridge Hills, to describe what Barbara had done to them. "Every week, a new violation," Mrs. Nguyen said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Every month, new fines. We couldn't eat at family restaurants because the neighbors complained about smells. We couldn't play music at our daughter's birthday party because someone said it was foreign and disturbing. We sold our home for $40,000, less than we paid because we couldn't take it anymore. And now I find out it was all planned. It was all a scheme to steal from us." The jury watched Barbara Lawson as Mrs. Nguyen testified. Barbara tried to maintain her composure, but I could see her crumbling. Then James played the video again, the full version. 12 minutes of Barbara directing her team to vandalize my property, interspersed with her greatest hits. These people need to learn their place. Some immigrant family. Keep this community what it's supposed to be. The courtroom was silent. The settlement was reached 6 weeks later. The HOA's insurance company, eager to limit their exposure, agreed to pay $340,000 in damages to my family. Barbara Lawson personally pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations, receiving 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service with immigrant assistance organizations. Her husband faced separate charges for fraudulent real estate practices and eventually pleaded to avoid prison time. The Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association was dissolved by vote of its remaining members. They decided, overwhelmingly, that no HOA at all was better than the risk of ever enabling something like this again. And my mother finally felt safe in her own home. It's been 6 months since the settlement. The cameras are still up. I took down the hidden ones, but kept the visible ones. Partly habit. Partly because I still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m., sure I've heard footsteps, sure someone is coming. That kind of vigilance doesn't disappear overnight. But mostly, the cameras capture peaceful things now. Deer crossing the back lawn in the early morning mist. Neighborhood kids riding bikes past on their way to school. The mail carrier who waves at my mother every day now and sometimes stops to admire her garden. The garden has grown wild and beautiful. Tomatoes heavy on the vine, peppers in red and green and orange. Bok choy and bitter melon and Chinese broccoli and flowers in colors so vivid they look artificial. My mother spends hours out there every day, hands in the dirt, face turned up to the sun. Neighbors stop by now. Real neighbors, the ones who came forward after everything settled to apologize, to introduce themselves, to explain that they hadn't known what Barbara was doing or had known but been too afraid to speak up. Some of them were probably telling the truth. Some of them probably weren't. It doesn't matter anymore. My mother gives them vegetables, fresh tomatoes, peppers, herbs, whatever is ripe. She doesn't speak much English, but she communicates through food, through generosity, through the simple act of offering something grown with her own hands. It's her way of saying, we're neighbors now, for real. Last week, the woman from across the street brought her mother over. Another immigrant from Vietnam who had been too scared to walk in the neighborhood after hearing what happened to us. My mother took her hand, showed her the garden, and promised her in broken English mixed with Mandarin that no one would bother her here. That this was their neighborhood now. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 elderly women who barely shared a common language communicated through tomato plants and understanding. And I thought about my father. He died in a rented apartment, dreaming of a home he never got. He died thinking that maybe the American dream was only for certain people. For the people who looked right, talked right, fit into some narrow definition of who was allowed to succeed. But he was wrong. The dream isn't given. It's taken. It's fought for. It's defended with cameras and lawyers and the stubborn refusal to accept that anyone has the right to push you out of a place you've earned. They sent 6 guys in matching vests to intimidate a 72-year-old immigrant woman. They thought we would break. They thought we would run. They thought 40 years of sacrifice could be erased with violation notices and threatening letters and manufactured complaints. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. This wasn't just a house. This was the end of a journey that started in Taiwan in 1979, with 2 suitcases and $400 and a dream that refused to die no matter how hard the world tried to kill it. My father didn't live to see this house, but I like to think he knows. I like to think that somewhere he's watching my mother in her garden, touching the soil, growing things, finally home. They sent 6 guys. I sent 1 lawyer and the 12 cameras, and 40 years of my father's sacrifice. Some people build fences to keep others out. I installed cameras to make sure they couldn't hide who they really were. Turns out, racists hate 2 things: losing and being recorded while losing. Barbara Lawson got both, and my mother got her home. The home my father died dreaming about. The home no one will ever take from us. There's a new sign by the front gate now. I made it myself, carved the letters into a piece of cedar and stained it dark to match the fence posts. It says, Chen Family Home, Estor, 2024, after 40 years of waiting. Every morning when I walk out to get the paper, I look at that sign. And every morning, I think about what it took to earn the right to put it there. Some people inherit their homes. Some people buy them easily, never knowing what it means to struggle. But some of us, the children of immigrants, the ones whose parents worked themselves to the bone for decades just for a chance, we know what that sign really means. It means we made it. It means they couldn't stop us. It means this piece of land, this 1/4 acre of Texas earth, is ours by right and by law, and by the simple, stubborn fact that we refuse to give up. My father's dream, finally realized. My mother's sanctuary, finally secure. And if anyone ever tries to take it again, I'll be ready. The cameras are always watching.